Welcome back to episode 16 of Talking Prisoner, part 2. Sean has been generous with his time to come back as we took too long in the last one. Welcome back. Welcome back, Ken.
Thank you, mate. My pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. So we're gonna jump into episode 692. So we're at the end of Prisoner.
Right.
It's the last episode, which is brilliantly written and directed. Especially the last scenes where we see Joan in her cell and the inmates chanting Ferguson, Ferguson, which was started by Brumby Tucker, played by Cheryl Monks, who we've spoken to. And it's an interesting scene because even after all the bad things that she's done, since she was at Wentworth, you couldn't help feel a little bit sorry for her in that cell. Do you remember the moments directing that scene with her in the cell and working with Maggie?
Yeah, and that's absolutely a tribute to Maggie, that she could have been that vile a villain for as long as she was. That we do feel for Joan at the end there, and I can remember she was very much in character for all of that. I mean, on other occasions, Maggie could be quite light and chirpy and jokey between scenes, and then pull on the leather gloves and away we go. But I don't recall that of her with this run of scenes, and it was fun. It was enjoyable to shoot, but there was just that underlying element that times were changing, and we would never pass this way again.
And that was the last scene.
Yeah.
I know just quickly we did touch on the ending in part 1, but what was some of the other alternate endings that they were thinking about with Prisoner? Do you remember? There was anything thrown around apart from the freak going to jail? Was there any other?
Look, most of those conversations happened in the plotting room, so I only kind of got wind of them when I was chatting with the guys, maybe over lunch in a break, or so I heard snippets. And to be honest, you'd be better off, I think, getting somebody from the writing team to comment on that. Their comments, I think, would be more reliable than mine.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Just thought I'd check.
You actually watched the last episode when it aired. Were you happy with it, or would there have been something that you might have liked to have changed? It's one of the most talked about episodes of Prisoner. So were you really pleased with the way you directed it and the way it came together? Or did you want to do, in hindsight, something else?
Look, Ken, you always want it to be better. And often, certainly I do, and I think a lot of people do, whenever they see their work back, the first thing they see is the thing that could have been better or that wasn't quite right. And maybe the things that they perceive as failings rather than what worked. I think if I was to change anything, it'd probably be to give John McTernan's character of Tom Lucas a little bit more to do, because I think John was a stunning actor in that time of Prisoner. He was great on GP. He was great in Cop Shop, and I've always been surprised that he hasn't had more of a longer profile. But I mean, that said, what his character did do in giving Rita her final ride wish, if you like. And interestingly enough, I think that was Glenn Ruland riding the bike from memory too. Anyway, yeah, that I would have liked to have been a bit different. But wrap-up episodes are always hard to do, and I think the story department and the writers and Ian Smith and Murray Trevor, the producers, and the cast, I think everyone did a fantastic job. And overall, I looked at it and I felt, you know, we've all done the best we could in the, you know, the circumstances we were given.
John McTiernan actually was a real value for money kind of actor. I mean, he was just so good in GP and
GP was great.
Yeah, and you almost felt like he should have more to do, but there just wasn't anything more for him to do. He did what he did very well, but you know, I can understand where you're coming at there, because I did think that he's such a good actor, and you'd like to see him, you know, contribute a lot more that he could have possibly done, but there wasn't any room really.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised we haven't seen him in a whole bunch of features that, you know, right up there at the head of the title. So, but there you go. That's the industry.
It's interesting you say that, though. I think that about a lot of Australian actors. You think, why are they not in some of these brilliant movies and TV shows that are being made? You know.
Yeah.
They're such talented people. This is more of a fan question as well, because a lot of fans have asked, and myself included. But while you're directing the last 2 episodes, especially the last episode, was it true they were pulling down sets as you had finished shooting the scene?
Look, they were, and that was really, really heartbreaking for a lot of people. I mean, I was actually kind of prepared for it, because the same thing had happened when I directed the last episode of Cop Shop. And I remember we had our control room, and that was because it was in a hired kind of a warehouse situation in South Melbourne, where all the sets were. And in the loading bay, there was an OB truck, and that was our control room and recording room. And I remember running into the studio from the van to give give a couple of notes to the actors on the set. And I raced around the corner and just came to a dead stop, because these guys were ripping into the sets that we just finished, and they were literally tearing them down. They weren't going into storage, so they didn't have to be nice. They just had to do it quickly. And it really was a tug at the heartstrings to see, you know, these walls being ripped. And so, you know, as I say, I sort of mentally prepared myself, having been through that once. But the first time you see it, it's a real shock, and it was a shock for a lot of people that day.
So
Yes, well, Neighbours was coming in from Studio A,
right,
into Studio B, and it's only a few months later that I got to meet up again with Elspeth Ballantyne, because she was playing Kathy Alessi in Neighbours. So it wasn't, just a year or so later, I suppose. So I went on to working on Neighbours after that, still in Studio B.
Wow.
Mm. Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, good crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's just progress. You know, that happened to free Studio A up, and B became the drama studio, basically, and Neighbours is still, to the best of my knowledge, is still shot there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Last time I worked on it was about 1995.
Okay.
Yeah. The equipment had changed, but the sets were the same.
Maybe we can't say the same about ourselves.
The scene at the end when they walk Joan out to the police car in handcuffs, and the camera cuts to every inmate that is standing outside, is a very iconic scene. Do you remember whose idea was that, to shoot it like that?
Yeah. No, that was mine. I mean, apart from the fact that there was great I think, dramatic value to be had in seeing in close up the faces of the people that have been tortured by the freak for so long. It was a way of linking the audience emotionally with the prisoners that they'd spent, 692 episodes with. And at the same time honouring those background players, because they were very much part of the show's fabric and the heart and soul that made it and supported and made the world real behind the leading players. And it just seemed to be a very appropriate thing to do. And to be honest, I wasn't 100% sure about it, only because in commercial television, you're constantly mindful that if you go too slow, if you allow the pace to be too slow, there's a danger that somebody higher up the food chain than you will say, oh, let's tighten it up, let's speed it up. And I felt it was important for that scene to get into almost a heartbeat rhythm of that intercut. And, fortunately, it was able to stay that way.
It was very well done.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Just recently, and I'd not seen the entire final episode up until that point. So it had an impact.
Oh, cool. That's lovely to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the background inmates, because that's the first thing that came to my mind with that scene was how good is this that they're showing the background inmates, they're cutting to each one, the regulars and then the background ones. I thought that was such a brilliant idea.
Thanks, man.
Because you're right, they did play such a big part. They're always there. They're always in the background.
Yeah.
They're not talking. Yeah. They're still there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that was your idea. That's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Someone uploaded the last episode of Prisoner to YouTube, which they're probably not supposed to. It's had over 300,000 views, and there's over 1,331 comments about it. I read a lot of comments on episodes on YouTube and things like that. And one comment was, episode 692 was some of the best produced, best written, best directed show on Australian TV. So my question is to you, what was it like being a part of something that's so special that is still watched today?
Mate, it's really heartwarming. I mean, the industry can be quite brutal. And I think I said earlier that it's a truism in show business that you're only as good as your last gig. And out of sight is very much out of mind, in the film and television industry. And there have been periods in my career that came after Prisoner where I didn't work as a director and I didn't work as a writer. I was fortunate enough to be able to go back to Crawford's for a while and be the director of international sales. But those periods come to all of us, I think, in any industry. You have up times and down times. And to be able to look back and go, something that I did back then and was part of back then, that the input that we all made, that we all created together, is still being enjoyed and touching people's hearts so much further down the track. That's just a real gift. I mean, it's not something that you get in a lot of other careers. And I'll just always will be grateful for it. The universe put me in and all of us, as Louise pointed out, this bunch of young, crazy people coming together in that point in time. And that was the gift to all of us. So, we're well blessed.
Before Ken gets to his question, I do have a question for Ken and yourself. Do you both think that it ended at the right time? Do you think it, some TV shows in Australia have gone on for, like Neighbours, over 4,000 episodes, Bellbird, over 1,500 episodes. Do you think Prisoner could have gone on, or that was the perfect time?
Look, I think they pulled the plug a little early in terms of it was still pulling good figures. I think there was life in it. Certainly the story department had lots more that they wanted to run with, and the challenge for them was kind of killing their darlings and going, okay, we've got to wrap stuff up now, so we're not going to start the stories that we've got ready to go that we're really passionate about. But you know, they pulled the plug when they did, and you kind of got to live with that. What do you think, Cam?
I'm sort of ambivalent with it. You could have, it seemed that it was running down by then, by 4 or 5 years, even though I take into consideration that the ratings were still pretty reasonable. I think it finished in its time. It may have needed a regeneration of a lot more cast to come into it, to carry it through further.
Mm-hmm.
But in consideration, Neighbours is still running to this very day. So yeah, there's no reason why it couldn't have gone on for longer. But as you said, they decided that it was time, and I think it went out in a very fine blaze of glory.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it is good to go out a little more up there than down there.
I think what fans would have loved to have seen is probably maybe another 2 or 3 episodes, just seeing Joan inside jail, how she would have handled being in jail on the other side of the bars, with some of the old prisoners that she had transferred to Blackmore, or but
yeah, there was certainly a lot of that, that you could have done. But I guess it probably got down to what Grundy management wanted to do with the money that they were then pouring into Prisoner, and likewise the network. I mean, all of that becomes the deciding factor, because money rules.
Sure does. Yeah, although the thought of Joan as top dog, suddenly you think this could have been the invigorating, essence that was required to fire it up again.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, because the realists amongst us, what you've just described or suggested, Matt, in those couple of extra eps of seeing Joan inside, that was certainly talked about, but everyone said, oh my God, they would never put Joan back in because you'd want to see her with the prisoners in Wentworth, not somewhere else. And they went, oh yeah, great idea, but no, it wouldn't happen in real life. My understanding, though, is that they did exactly that with that character in Wentworth.
They have.
I haven't seen all of that.
They haven't. So, yeah, I've been watching it, but the problem with that is I think she's been in it too long as an inmate now, and it's wearing.
Oh, all right. How do you bring her back as the?
Well, she was great she was great as the governor, but the problem is now, I personally, I think she's just in it too long now as an inmate. They should have wrapped it up quickly for a few episodes. Now she's in it for she's But you're right. Like Ken said, bring her back as a top dog for a few more episodes. That would have been fantastic, or a spin-off of Blackmore, her and Blackmore.
Okay, so you've worked on some other iconic TV shows such as Estreet, Paradise Beach, Home and Away, Breakers, All Saints, that you directed and wrote for. What was it like to write and direct episodes of Home and Away?
Look, it was good fun. Certainly a great honour, because it's very rare for that to happen. For pardon me, the one person to be able to write something and then direct it in serial television or series television in Australia, unless it's very short run, limited run miniseries stuff. Especially writing big specials like we talked about earlier about when Dita left the show the week of Shane's death. And I think, the other thing about it is, on a personal level, I've always found it really quite cathartic, because it's allowed me to bring a lot of what, because such serial television is very emotionally based stuff, and a lot of the big stuff does rely on what happens to us and how we cope, those of us who are left behind when someone that we love moves on. Shane's death was a real example of that. So for me, I've been able to, in both the writing and the directing, pour a lot of any of that happened to be part of my real life into those scripts. And I think to a certain extent, the actors too have found that kind of performance level, while it's been really intense for them at the time. That's an emotional release that they get through their job that I think a lot of us, that it might be healthy if a lot of us could find a way to do as well.
Yeah.
You also had Ray Ma in a much more cuddly kind of situation.
I'm not quite sure how to react to a sentence with the words Ray Ma and cuddly in the same sentence. I did want to say I remember calling him Megsy before, and I meant to clarify that for the folk. When he was a youngster, he had red hair, and a long time ago, way back in the days before television, the big free entertainment of the week was in the Sunday papers. There would be a really big, thick lift out just of comics. And one of the really popular comics was a thing called Ginger Megs. And that's where Ray got his nickname. I think it was either his footy mates or might even been back at school. But he was always Megsy Ma. So, something about Ray that I probably shouldn't have just told you, but I did.
Nothing like a bit of alliteration, though. Megsy Ma.
Megsy Ma. So go back to that Home and Away just for a second with Dita. Was he wanting to leave at that time, or was he just written out? They just wanted to.
Yeah, no, he made the decision and went to the producers and said, look, I'd like to move on. Happy to do it at a time that suits you, but kind of sooner rather than later. And then I think, and if anybody knows more accurately, I'm happy to be corrected. I think Melissa then wanted to leave, and it kind of, everything just fell into the right place at the right time again. And creatively they decided, okay, well, let's do Shane first and then get another few weeks out of Angel's reaction to that, and then they're both gone, and it's kind of tied up their duration within the show.
Did you see the big articles circulating a few years ago on Melissa George and Dita? It was all over the internet that they absolutely hated each other at the time of shooting Home and Away. It was just and they bring back all the scenes about when he died, and all these rumors circulating around. And
look, I think hate's probably a
harsh word. Yeah.
Look, I could tell you stories about so many couples that just work wonderfully on screen, and you really have to struggle to keep them in the studio in the same space together.
Oh, really?
When somebody called cut. That's not uncommon. And I'm not suggesting it was that way between Melissa and Dita. But it happens, and it's a job, and you know that it's not forever when somebody says action that you've got to pretend to be nice, and you get the reasonable paycheck to pretend to be good night, to be nice. So, do it and move on.
Oh, it was really funny. It was a post on Facebook. So that one of the news places put an article about it, and the amount of comments about it. It was talking about Shane's death on the show, and then they were talking about Melissa George, and it was just endless comments, thousands of comments about them working.
Wow.
Yeah. Speaking of great shows, Estreet was another one that you wrote and directed for. I'd like to just quickly touch on it because there's a lot of Prisoner fans that are Estreet fans. So you work with some great cast members on Estreet, including Les Damon, Simon Baker, Tony Pearson, Tony Martin, Vic Rooney, Diana Craig, Penny Cook, Noel Hodder, Peter Tapano, and Bunny Brook, which a lot of them were also on Prisoner. How did Estreet start? How'd you get the job on Estreet?
Look, that was a tough one, actually, because it hadn't been long after I'd left Melbourne to come to Sydney, which I did for Home and Away. I was writing for Home and Away from Melbourne. I used to fly up for the meetings. And then when I started directing for them, I made the physical move. And I figured, okay, I'm up in Sydney. There's this show called Estreet. I've watched it. I like it. I want to be part of it. And they were a really tough nut to crack. So I cold called them and said, here I am. This is what I've done. And they said, thanks, but we're fine. So, I gave it another 6 weeks or so and went and knocked on their door again. Yeah. Heard you the first time. Thanks for reminding us. See you later. And then eventually the third time I went back, I think it coincided with a director who was going to do a block for them wasn't available. Anyway, something opened up. They pulled me in for one block. And then we had at the end of each block, the director has screens the director's cut, which is the way they see the episode, to the producers and the EP, who was Forrest Redlich. And then traditionally they go away and have their own tweak of it. But as soon as they saw that first director's cut, they said, well, look, we've got another 3 blocks ready to shoot over the next 3 months. Do you want to sign up for those? So I did, and ended up, staying with them for quite a while.
Wow. And speaking of directors, you worked with Rod Hardy, Tony Ossica, Lee Spence, Steve Mann, Alistair Smart, and obviously yourself. And a lot of those directors were directors on Prisoner who you've worked with.
Indeed, yeah.
Wow. And what was Forrest like? Because he actually created the Estreet on the back of A Country Practice. He modelled it on the first few episodes of A Country Practice, which he wrote and produced.
Yeah, he was script producer on Country Practice. And then he co-produced Estreet with Bruce Best, I think it was. And together they took it to the network and they got the first series order. And then Bruce left and Forrest took over. And that was an interesting time for the industry. I mean, Forrest was, I think one of the reasons that Estreet worked so well is because Forrest was this take no prisoners cowboy. I mean, he was a tough guy with prison tats, and he happily wore them. He spoke like someone who'd done time in prison. He spoke more like someone who'd done time in prison if there were females around, or if he was giving a speech to the cast. He loved to provoke. He was a really colourful character. Nothing was off limits to him. And he would go home on a Friday night. They lived up in Palm Beach, and he'd go home on a Friday night and he'd stop at the local video store, which was back in the days when VHSs were the way to go. And as he walked in, he'd say to the local kids up there, that was their local hang, he'd say, okay, what should I say? And they'd tell him what was flavour of the month. He'd take that home and he'd watch it, and then he'd come in the next week and he would plot a version of that to unfold within Estreet.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
and we because Forrest was very hands-on as the story plotter and very hands-on as the EP. He would fully immerse himself in the executive producer's cut and in the sound mix. He was very much into music, and he had some groups like the Teen Queens.
Oh, the Teen Queen, yes, yeah.
His record label. So we would be waiting on a Monday for Forrest to come in, all really nervous to find out what he'd watched over the weekend. And sometimes it was fantastic. The end result was great. But there were other times, like the episode where Bruce Samazan's character believed he was turning into a werewolf, which was the entire story spine of the 2 hours of that block, which I inherited and directed. And I had this cast in tears saying to me, "You've got to go and talk to Forrest and tell him we can't perform this. We don't know how to make it real." And I said, guys, we've just got to find a way, because it's done. The scripts are released. We've got to shoot it. We're in, here we are in the studio. We're in the sets. Let's find a way. And we did. And those kind of crazy out there episodes, I think that the viewers really related to. And of course, it also gave them Mr. Bad.
Oh, Mr. Bad, yes.
Two came out of Forrest's head, and that was a fantastic long-running villainous arc.
Yeah.
As wild and crazy as he was, I think it was for the good of the show. And I wish there were more Forrests like him in the industry today.
Because there was a cast member that got sacked because he didn't agree with the werewolf storyline, apparently. I'm trying to remember.
He what?
He complained that he said it's not believable.
Yeah, and that's a salient lesson for all young actors. By all means, give your opinion, but don't do it on the set when you're standing under the microphone, because that's how Forrest heard that. Because in everything that was happening in the studio, he was able to watch on his TV in his office just to keep an eye. And that's a standard thing in the industry. Like the EPs can just flick a button and see what's happening in their studio. Producers can do that. Production managers. And unfortunately for that actor, Forrest was in his office listening. And it happened within half an hour of that.
Half an hour?
So, yeah, it's the quick and the dead.
That's amazing. Great story. Great story. I also read that Estreet had a lot of location work in the areas of Rozelle and Balmain, which were apparently, and I don't know this, but online it says that back then they were classed as really gritty areas. Was it challenging shooting with Estreet, having so many outside locations?
Yeah, it was. But again, it was to the benefit of the show. I mean, Balmain is a really fantastic suburb because it has got pockets that are gritty, and that you would imagine, the seedier elements of the folk in Estreet would perhaps choose to live there. Equally, just a few blocks away, you'd be able to get fantastic shots of the harbour. You've got the main drag through Balmain. It's such a picturesque suburb, but to shoot in it, the streets are very tight and it's physically challenging. And of course, not only the amount of location that Forrest would really try and pump into every episode, but the quality of it, the fact that, that it wasn't just two people talking, walking down the footpath. There was always things happening, things being driven. There were, stunts. There were when they did the the long-running arc of the Gangsters, which was after Forrest, I think, had gone home and watched a video of not Mean Streets. What's the other one that Scorsese did?
The Godfather.
Sorry?
Godfather.
No.
Goodfellas.
The De Niro, Joe Pesci. Why can't I think of the name? Goodfellas, yes. So yeah, Forrest fell in love with Goodfellas, and so the guests for about 3 months were this gang of gangsters that came into Estreet, and then to fight them was this other character, Jack, who came in with a big long dust coat, like, you know, Henry Fonda coming out of.
I actually wanted to speak to you about Jack, played by Andrew Williams. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, you know, that they were really fun episodes to shoot. But, you know, people were shooting each other. They were driving cars into each other. They were killing each other. I remember one episode where a guy, his character had been killed by the gangsters. And for some reason, I forget the details, but they had to pretend that he was actually alive. So they wrapped him in Glad wrap, put a hat on his head, propped him up in the seat of the passenger seat, and drove him around so that the guys that they were trying to fool thought he was still alive. So that was the kind of really out there stuff that Forrest would come up with.
He watched Weekend at Bernie's that weekend.
Sorry?
He must have watched Weekend at Bernie's that week.
Look, wouldn't surprise me. And I remember actually in the director's cut of that, because that revealed that he was dead, but that they'd wrapped him in plastic and put a hat in his head and they drove off. That was the last shot of the episode of that block. So we were sitting in the director's screening, and I'm thinking, this scene's coming up and nobody's going to buy it because it is so wild and so out there. And Forrest was sitting right next to me, and it came up and came to that scene, and then the car roared off and into the end credits, and there was deathly silence. And then I looked at Forrest and he looked at me, and we both cracked up. And it was one of those moments where we knew that it was totally insane and out there, but that the audience was going to love it. So, you know. What are you going to do?
That's 1992, Estreet was at its peak and you were directing. It won a Logie for most popular series. What was it like to work on at that precise time, Logie time?
Look, Logie time is always a nightmare because most of your cast have been invited. And it usually happens, you know, we're in Sydney. The Logies traditionally happen in Melbourne. So it means you've lost them for some of the Friday, for the ones that go down early to get ready for it. And certainly most of the Monday when they're all hungover and they come back. And then the ones that can't go, so that you've at least got something to shoot, they're not happy to be there shooting with you because they've missed out on the Logies. And it usually is a really solid nightmare for the production department because they've got to try and keep the crews, you know, busy and with something to do. But at the same time, it's really important to have the stars of the show at the Logies because that's what the audience wants.
Yeah. My next question was about the Werewolf storyline, which Bruce Samazan thinks was a great storyline. He enjoyed it and liked it. So that was some.
Well, I'm glad he's come around now. I remember at the time that he wasn't so impressed.
Well, he's a real estate agent now, and I saw an interview with him online, and he said, "Yeah, the Werewolf. Yeah, there's a lot of stories about the Werewolf storyline, and yeah." But
look, we
wanted to move up. Forrest wanted to move the show down to Melbourne from Sydney, but they just killed the idea.
Yeah, look, Forrest wanted to do a lot of things, and some of them he got away with, and some he didn't. You know.
you still speak to him, or?
Look, I haven't seen him for ages. I'm not even sure where he is now. So yeah, it's been a long time since we've had a chat.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got some fan questions, if that's okay.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah. The first one is from Janice Robertson, and she says, I'm one of the saddos that reads all the credits on shows. And yes, I recognise Sean's name. You're very talented. What was it like switching between the different roles you did on shows? You know, writing, directing, being Superman.
Look, it was great fun. It was a really purple patch, and I was lucky to have that opportunity. It did claim a lot of hours because directing was a full-time job through the day, even in the prep weeks and the post weeks, but certainly on location and studio week, you had to be either on location or in the studio, and you had to work to other people's schedules. At the same time, I was quite often writing for another show, and while that only had the one deadline of when the script had to be delivered, it did mean often that I was writing either at nights or on weekends, when otherwise I would have been recovering from, it's certainly not the hardest job in the world, but directing can be demanding. But I wouldn't change it for quids. It was a great training ground and just a lot of fun.
Janice also follows that up with, can you provide any advice for anyone wanting to work in the TV industry? And do you have to have gone to university, or are there other ways of getting into the industry, like blundering in? No, she didn't.
Blundering is a very popular way.
I blundered into it. I know that. So advice?
Look, I think the advice is, just do it. I didn't do uni. As I said before, I didn't even finish high school. And back when I wanted to break into it, there actually weren't any film schools as such. So I'm not saying don't go to film school, but I think whether you do or whether you don't, the key thing is to, whatever your passion is to find a way to exercise that. Like writing was one of mine, and I talked about getting that first gig on Prisoner by being in the right place at the right time. That said, 10, 15 years before that, when I really was a youngster, working on a show called The Saturday Show at Channel 10 in Brisbane, which back then Kerry Ann Kennelly was the princess in the magic castle of The Saturday Show.
Wow.
So it was a 3-hour live-to-air show, Monday, 9 o'clock till midday. And a lot of it was cartoons, but the rest of it, which was, live games with the kids and what have you, that was all strung together with a central spine of a telling within the magic castle of a version of a fairy tale. And there'd be, I think there was 4 or 5 15-minute segments. And Kerry Ann was the princess in the castle, essentially. At one stage, my brother was the knight opposite her, Sir Albert Winterbottom, I think he played. And Baron von Weirdo was the bad baron who lived in the dungeon. So I got the opportunity to write those stories. Didn't get any money for it, but it taught me how to, what worked and what didn't. And if you look at the industry today, like I'm talking to you guys on a cell phone that's just propped up in front of me, and the pictures are incredible compared to what they used to be. and you can get the devices that will, help you turn them into dollies or cranes. So it's a lot easier now to be able to write and shoot and edit and make the short films. And if you've got a really good short film, it's a fantastic thing. It's a calling card that you can leave with the people that you want to work with along with your CV. It can sometimes be a proof of concept for, if it's a really great idea, that can extrapolate out into a full-length feature film. And again, it's a great calling card to take to producers who might be more experienced and say, look, I've got this idea for a feature film. If they like that idea and you then say, oh, and by the way, I made a short film of it, that's really impressive. Really, not only do they respect the fact that you actually had the nous and the guts to do it, they're the kind of people that they want working for them, because they know that you're creative and you seize the initiative, and that's what the industry is all about. So, and I think that applies to whether you want to be a director or a writer or do sound or be a director of photography or actor, whatever you want. Find some people like that. There's a site called Star Now that a lot of actors use, but equally writers and directors use. You can join. It doesn't cost a huge amount of money. There's an element where you can join for free, and they're just constantly advertising projects like that people are doing, and they're a great opportunity to find a bunch of like-minded people to work with. So the opportunities are out there. So by all means, go to the film schools or go to uni, but I don't think it's essential. I don't think it's I think there are ways of breaking in without that, if that's not something you want or can afford to do.
Yeah, that's some good advice. Do you think a lot of things get missed because of people that are higher up? Like I was reading yesterday, this new TV show Squid Game that's huge now, but it was knocked back by so many networks and things like The Practice, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Sons of Anarchy. Like they all exhausted so many networks with their story, and they just got told no. And then one final last network gave them that chance, and then obviously the shows become huge hits. Do you think a lot of people, like a lot of things get missed? Like,
absolutely, yeah.
Things that are from people that want to break into the industry that got no connections. And
for sure, yeah. You've got to be resilient. You've got to be able to take the knockbacks and not let that completely destroy you. Sometimes it takes a while to pick yourself up and shake yourself off and go, okay, I'm going to dive back in. But it only takes one connection with the right person to open that door and start that chain, and that can happen. And there are many examples of people with not a huge amount of experience, but they did do the short film or they did write the script, and it fell into the right hands, and then they were able to travel with it and get elevated. So don't lose hope about that. But I think the big answer there, Matt, is yes. There's a lot of, in the industry, a lot of people who are the gatekeepers as to whether or not an idea moves further up the chain only have the power to say no. They don't have the power to say yes. That power relies in a person or a number of people above them. So they need to protect their position. If they take a project further up the ladder and it's deemed to be, why are you wasting my time with this? Then they're sort of risking their own position. So it is easier for the gatekeepers to say no than to say yes. Sometimes, as you just pointed out, Matt, there are many examples of shows that were just knocked back, that when they finally found their home were huge.
Yeah, it's amazing. I read somewhere the one that knocked back The Sopranos, he got sacked for knocking it back. after HBO picked it up. I hope we get this surname right. This is a Talking Prisoner regular. He always posts questions. Max Dweeb, we think it's pronounced. He said, Sean, you're an absolute legend. You've directed some of the best prisoner episodes, in my opinion. He's got two questions. How did you feel directing the final episode, and were you asked specifically to direct it?
Well, look, thank you for the kind words, Max. I wasn't asked specifically to direct it because at any one time on Prisoner, there were 4 directors and they were working simultaneously. One would be in pre-production, another would be on location, another would be shooting in studio, and another would be in post-production. And they'd all be working in those different areas simultaneously, which meant that at the end of every week, a fresh batch of 2 episodes of Prisoner could be released. So when they made the decision to pull the plug for whatever that reason was that ended up on that episode, I just happened to be the director of it.
Okay.
So that was the luck of the draw. So I can, though, tell you, Max, that I was asked to not direct it by Kendall Flanagan, who was one of those directors that I just talked about. Kendall's no longer with us, but he was a real character, and he'd been with the show for a long time. And, you know, to his credit, if you don't ask, you don't get. He wasn't backwards at all about coming forwards and saying, mate, can we swap? You do mine, which I think was the 3rd last one. Or maybe, no, because that's right. I always used to follow Kendall. So he did the 2nd last block. And then I did the last block of those last 2 hours. So he missed out just again by the luck of the draw by 1. So anyway, as much as I loved him, I said, Kendall, you're a great guy, but no. Because, you know, it really was the opportunity of a lifetime, and to be able to, even though I didn't know how iconic the show was going to become, I knew then to be able to say, here's my CV, and I directed the last episode of Prisoner. That's just something that nobody else can say.
Yeah.
You know, even if it was going to turn out to be a load of trash, it would still have been something that nobody else could say.
That's true.
David Beards says, this is always going to be tricky, isn't it? Because he asks, what was your favourite TV program to work on?
Look, I think for a lot of what I said before, it's got to be Estreet, because Forrest was so wild and unpredictable. And because of those crazy eps, and because the actors were so passionate that, you know, some of them were prepared to get sacked for saying their opinion. You know, but, you know, like Mr. Bad and the characters of Jack and all the stuff that the Rev went through. The stories were wild and fun and crazy. And I think, too, because of his love of music, I can remember directing one episode, and the opening shot was, there was Tony Pierin. Gosh, I forget who else was in the car, but there was like 4 of the regulars were in the car, and it was in the bright yellow convertible Falcon that was one of the cars on the show, and they were going camping. So we found a dirt road not too far out of town that looked like it was in the country. And Forrest's son was the musical director on the show at that time. And he was crazy enough to go, look, they can only say no. So he rang up to see if he could get permission to use an Elton John song.
Wow.
And they said yes.
Oh, really?
So here I was directing, and we had playback of Elton John singing the Saturday Night song. know,
Oh, yeah.
and I thought, this is just crazy. This shouldn't be happening to, you know, a kid from Brisbane, but how good is this moment?
Wow.
So it was those kinds of things that just made it a really unusual, spontaneous something that in most situations the networks wouldn't say yes to. And for some reason, everything had aligned and the planets were all where they needed to be. And the show got the nod, and we were able to make all those crazy episodes.
Music was a really big part of East Street. I mean, it launched
It was
careers
huge, yeah.
of like Melissa and Tony Pierin,
Yeah.
Kelly Abbey, and I mean Noiseworks even with John Stevens. I mean, there was always a Noiseworks song in the background of East Street.
Yeah, and I think that was something that spoke a lot to the audience too, because it just wasn't generic music. It was music that they that spoke to their heart, because they met their girlfriend or boyfriend to that track, or broken up with their boyfriend or girlfriend to that track. So it really meant something to them.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome.
But for those that those Prisoner fans, what was your second? No, just joking. Your second, no. How has the industry? This is from David again. How's the industry changed since the days of Prisoner? Can you give us an example or two?
Yeah, it's because we've moved on and matured, if you like, or we're more politically correct. There's a lot more to be aware of. There's a lot more to be mindful of. Many more minefields to potentially step into in terms of what you might say or the kind of stories that you might want to tell or develop. On a practical level, Prisoner, shows like Prisoner and Cop Shop, we were able to make 2 hours of those every week, because all the studio stuff was 3 cameras side by side that were switched on the run by a vision switcher. All the shows today, they're shot single camera. So that puts a much bigger strain, I guess, on terms of how much you can shoot single camera in a week. But equally, it allows you to raise the level of what you're shooting by putting the camera exactly where you want it. When you've got 3 cameras at the front of a set, there's only so far that you can go before you're running into a wall. So there are swings and roundabouts for it. But I think overall, it's easy to look back in hindsight with rose-coloured glasses, but I think there was something to be said for the fact that we often didn't know what we were doing, and therefore we didn't know that we couldn't do what we were trying to do. And as a result, we actually got there. And there's an electricity about that somehow gets through the camera to the audience. I don't know. It's a piece of magic.
Sure is. Please forgive me if I get this surname wrong, because I am shocking at pronouncing surnames, but Ashi Padalecki Pratt said he directed me working on Paradise Beach. Absolute legend. Paradise Beach was another show you've worked on. Great show.
Look, it was. All right. Sorry?
That was shot on the Gold Coast.
On the Gold Coast. So it was a fascinating show, because it was done by the guys who, I think I mentioned before, I spent some time going back to Crawford's as their Director of International Sales. That came out of their existing Director of International Sales and their Crawford's existing head of production. They got together and tried to buy the company, Crawford's, when Hector was ready to sell it. And that didn't quite work. And the end result was that it was deemed, I don't know how that quite works because it's business, but they felt they had to move on. So anyway, they got together and they started their own production company. And that was just when the Warner World Studios were opening on the Gold Coast. So they moved in there and they got Jock Blair, who used to be one of the writers on a show for Crawford's, Sullivans, along with Jock had a huge pedigree of shows that he was on. So they got Jock to produce it. And it was a combination of really inexperienced young actors, which meant that they could afford to do it. So they weren't getting a lot of money. So it was a springboard piece. And some people who had done that kind of show before, like myself, so they took them up there, gambling on the fact that they know how to do it, so they'll help us kind of break new ground up here, because a lot of the crews up there didn't have all that much drama experience. They were experienced in high-end retail commercials and what have you. And they had a big chunk of money invested in it by a company called Chrysalis, one of whose people on the board was, no, sorry, I'm talking about Breakers now. I'm about to tell you a lie. I don't want to do that. Anyway, Paradise Beach was all about trying to break new ground in a new and essentially create a new Hollywood in Australia on the Gold Coast, which is the perfect place to do it. Again, a lot of fun, and it kind of worked, I think, but on some levels it kind of didn't. But we're all like that. We all have hits and misses, and there are some episodes of shows that I would rate higher than others, not for any reason because of the work done on them wasn't as good. It's just that sometimes things don't quite work as well as you would hope. But it was still a great experience.
I thought it was a good show, and it put the Gold Coast on the map too. People saw the show and went, wow, look at the Gold Coast. It looks amazing.
Look, it did. And one of the young guys on it, I'm trying to think of his name. He's a blonde boy. Anyway, he went to Hollywood, the real Hollywood, and I think became huge on Days of Our Lives. So he's a really big name over there still. So it did launch, a lot of careers. The young guy in the lead, Tony, I'm blanking on all these names. It's a feeling like I'm being really rude. But he's now a feature film writer and director. And of course, all these names will come to me the moment you switch off your recorder. So yeah, it pumped out a lot of people and gave a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
Johnny Walker, sorry, I'm thinking about lunch. John Walker, did you direct from the control room, or did you prefer to be on the studio floor? And what was your favourite approach to directing?
Look, I directed from the control room on shows that were switched on the run, where, as we talked about before, it was 3 cameras facing the set, essentially. And there was a vision mixer or a vision switcher sitting at the vision mixer, just pressing the buttons to put the cameras to air. Because that, in my head, it allowed me to get more of a sense of what the viewer was going to see. Because I tried as much as I could just to block out the individual camera monitors for the take and look at what hopefully would be the end result going to air and get a sense of, yes, that works, or no, that doesn't. We need to adjust this for another take. The thing with camera shoots, certainly it's good working on the floor. Everybody's a critic, Ken. Yeah, for single camera shoots, working on the floor is the way to go, because you're right there. You can speak directly to the actors. You don't have to go through a floor manager, because sometimes that can take time, or you can then just turn and say something to the DP, and it's much more direct and much more intimate, I think. And there's a stronger relationship, creative relationship between everybody involved.
I'm sorry you're being upstaged by my dog. Matt, it's your shot.
Over to me. Darren Hembro said, what did you find most difficult to film on Prisoner?
Well, apparently it was Joan Ferguson having her head operated on.
Yep.
Excuse me while I go and shut the dog down.
Gosh, that's a tough one. Certainly the locations were challenging. I mean, probably the Blackmore riot, because as I remember, we took out, because we had the interiors were in studio at Nunawading, the exteriors were at Spotswood, and in order to marry, because it was a siege, it was almost the whole block was predicated on the fact that Craven and Joan were on this side with a whole bunch of guards with guns, and all the prisoners were on this side, locked in, and they were all glaring at each other across this quadrangle where poor old Bongo was chained to the grate in the middle of the quadrangle. But it meant you've got drama happening where people can't actually necessarily reach out and touch each other. So in order to not, or to create the illusion that they were happening at the same time, because in shooting it that way, what it meant was that on location, we'd shoot all the Spotswood scenes on the location week, which were only half of the scene. And then we went to the studio the next week, we'd have to shoot the other half of the scene. So I had some sets built that matched the studio, and they were taken out to location.
Oh, wow.
So we then get some of the prisoners on location and shoot over their shoulder past a little bit of the set. And that then looked like the camera was looking from the set past them to the guards at Spotswood. And then we cheated vice versa on a couple of occasions where we had over shoulder Craven and Joan looking down, and we had the prisoners sort of inching out the door when they tried to get to Bongo and what have you. So it was those kinds of permutations, and the preparation for that kind of stuff was quite tricky. So I guess technically that and probably the boat escape episode were the most challenging to shoot, but equally the most fun.
Yeah. Just on Bongo, who was played by Shane Connor, who was a brilliant actor. How long was he actually chained down to the grate for? Do you remember how long that scene went?
Look, it was quite some time, and to his credit, Shane just totally became Bongo, and he didn't care how long he was there, because that really helped him.
Yeah.
Really dive into that whole thing that he was doing of, he was going cold turkey, and he needed his sister, and he was chained up, and he didn't know which way was up, and it just absolutely worked for him. And
actually, he played Slasher in Wentworth. Readers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, great casting. Great casting.
Right.
He would have made a great Slasher.
Yeah.
This next question comes from a fellow by the name of Kevin Summers.
Oh my gosh, I know that name.
He says, couldn't get a better man.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's coming. Asking about his putting a snake in a fictional matrimonial bed.
Well, what does one say? Kevin, it's been way too long since we worked together. And I'm not going to plead ignorance or innocence. Let's just say I'm not entirely sure that this is an appropriate platform for discussing snakes in fictional matrimonial beds. But I absolutely enjoyed your performance in scenes that might or might not have involved fictional matrimonial beds. And Chrissy Harris's too.
Christine Harris, who played Pippa on.
Indeed, yes.
Yes. So that's the answer to the question.
That's as much as I'm going to give.
That's the ultimate answer to the question, I think.
I was scratching my head when I saw that. I wasn't sure. So we'll leave.
I'm pleading the fifth. I'm not saying any more.
You can't plead the fifth in Australia. I think it's only America.
Well, we'll pretend this is for the States.
Now, this is where I'm supposed to wrap up, but I'm not. If I can just have you for maybe 5 more minutes, because there was a fan question that came in late. I think it was last night or yesterday. And I know we spoke about your favourite episode, 535, which was the Joan Ferguson operation. But this gentleman, Steve Gee, wanted to speak about episode 536, which I would like to as well. It was written by Coral Druin, directed by yourself. The cameramen were Ken Mulholland, Wayne Lavender, and David Triscott. So this was the flashback episode where we found out that B. Smith had died in a fire at Barnhurst, and they were flashing back to all the earlier episodes. And it was interesting. They were making it look like Lou Kelly and Lurch and all them had been there since day one when they hadn't, but they were. But Steve wanted to ask about the rec room scenes in this episode. He's very curious as why they all of a sudden there was another side of the rec room that never been seen before and was never seen after that episode. So can you tell us much about that episode?
Sure. Yeah. That episode is called what they call a bubble episode. And a bubble episode is when, and you'll see it a lot on, you can identify it a lot on Walking Dead, because they will have very self-contained episodes, one, maybe 2 in a row, where it's just 2 characters with a really intense story as they travel along and they're looking for someone, or or they're trapped somewhere and there are walkers outside. And that allows them to save all the money and the time to shoot the really big action pieces that happen every 4 to 6 episodes, where there's a million walkers and every second shot is a walker getting its head blown off for, there are tanks or there are cars, whatever it is. Now, in this instance, I'm not sure whether it was because of the amount that they'd spent on blocks either side and they had to contain their budget for this block, or whether something in my head is saying that they might have been hoping to get B back, and at the last minute that broke down and they had to go, okay, how do we create an episode here? So the whole look back thing, when I got the script, the first thing that I did was I said, I need to get all those, all those episodes pulled so that I can look at them, so that I know there's a thing called screen direction, which essentially is if somebody walks one way out of a set into the next scene, you need to make sure that it looks like they're walking in the same direction. And if you do a line across it, it can sometimes look as though they're walking that way and all of a sudden they're walking into themselves. the reason I mentioned that is that I felt it was really important for what was happening in the studio links scenes that the screen direction that finished in the studio rec room scene was a look that matched whatever was coming in on the scene from the existing episode that they were talking about, the remembrance, if you like. And that's why I got them to put in the fourth wall, is so that we could move the camera around and get the different directions that we wanted. And, you know, because it was an episode that had only a relatively short number of linking scenes, we had the extra time to do that, and to, you know, and some of those became sort of little single camera shots with the camera actually pushed up into the set where it wouldn't normally be able to go. So that was the reason behind it. But well spotted, Steve.
Yeah.
Just before you wrap up, Matt, going back to line crossing, can you give us a succinct example of a line cross?
I've done many.
Yes. The railway track with the camera on either side with the locomotive coming down the track springs to mind. The obvious, you know, cut from one camera to the other, and the train's going that away and then it's going that away.
It looks like in that example, which is a great example, the train track becomes the line. And when you put the camera on one side, you know, the left side of the line, and the train is coming towards you, it looks like the train is going left to right across the screen. The other camera, of course, will be on the other side of the track, pointing at the same train, but that train on that camera is going right to left. So it does, when you cut them together, you've got a lead up to a train wreck.
It would appear that when directors from another state come to Melbourne to direct AFL football, they tend to dot their cameras around the arena, which causes a lot of confusion.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's really crucial to get right. It's an easy thing to get wrong, but when you do, the audience is left going, "Oh, well, I don't know, who did he kick the ball to?" Or I'm just not understanding what's happening on the screen. And I know a lot of directors who have said that, and there have been many times when I've been one of them.
That's funny.
Lovely.
Before we wrap up, is there anything you can share with the fans that you're or that you are working on at the moment that you can mention?
Look, not by name, because a lot of pieces will have what they call an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, whereby you don't mention the piece without the strict permission of the producer, because sometimes if things are mentioned too early, their finance, you know, the backers will kind of get upset about it and sometimes pull funds. There's a whole host of reasons. But there is I can tell you there's a feature that I wrote about 18 months ago that's been delayed by COVID, but that's partly already shot and will be completed at the end of this year for release next year. And that'll be going out, I believe, on the new Paramount streaming platform. And that's got a big music element in it. There's the Bollywood thing happening that I mentioned, the one in the States. And if he gets that right, he then wants to shoot another script that I wrote for him called Cupid's Ghost. So I know I can talk about that one. And that's a rom-com that's essentially about how a guy, a real live guy, falls in love and is able to have a happy ending with a ghost.
Oh.
And what else? Yeah, the miniseries I mentioned before, that's in development, and who knows what else will come along.
I'm sure you'll have lots of things you'll be working on.
Yeah, and in between that, the occasional sort of acting gig, just to remind myself of what it is that we ask actors to do when they step in front of cameras.
Wow.
Mm.
So yeah, I was going to ask you that. So yeah, being an acting, is it sort of refresh you to when you're a director? It helps as a director having acted into.
Oh, look, absolutely. Writing helps being a better director. Directing helps you be a better writer. And an actor helps you understand what both those processes are asking of actors. Because and I think I mentioned this earlier, it really is so easy to forget how much courage it takes for an individual to dig inside themselves and just make that open to the rest of the world. It's, I've got so much respect for actors.
Awesome. I'm sure a lot of people that are wanting to get into the industry will get some great advice from this. So that was great. And that was episode 16, part 2, which will be available on the Talking Prisoner YouTube site. If you can like and subscribe, and it will be on all the podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify, where everyone can listen to and download. And it was an absolute honor to have you on, Sean. A real big honor.
Well, thank you, Matt. And Ken, thank you, both of you guys. As I said when we kicked off, I'm just really appreciative of what you're doing here, and it's been a pleasure to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you, Sean. And one thing I've learned today is that Kevin Summers watches Talking Prisoner.
Yeah.
As he should.
And who will be coming on at a later date as well. So looking forward to speaking to him too.
Yes, we've got a lot to talk about with Kevin.
Yeah, you can ask him about the matrimonial thing.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Cheers, guys.
See you soon.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, mate. We really appreciate it.
Excellent. Yeah. No, I really enjoyed myself. Well done.